Mm. Hi, welcome to the this evening's training workshop. We'll get started in a few minutes. So if there's anything you need to do, check on the kids, get yourself a cup of tea or a cup of coffee, go do it now. We'll be starting in 3 or 4 minutes. Hi, good evening. We're going to get started in probably 1 minute. Hi, good evening, and thank you for joining me for this next session of school council training, sponsored by the Parent Community Office at TDSB. Tonight is going to the margins, and so we'll get started right now, I hope. So a couple of things to note before we begin. This workshop is being recorded, and you can find a copy of this and all of the training sessions this year for school councils on the PCEO TDSB YouTube page. So if you go to YouTube and just put PCO TDSB, up it'll come, and you'll find just a wealth of information and webinars and workshops that you can access there. If you have any questions, please write them in the chat. And if you think of it, please put it in capital letters so that I can distinguish between any comments and the questions. You will see that transcription is available. If you need that, just click on it. And for this evening's session, you will need a little piece of paper and a pencil for an activity that we're going to do. Now, I just have to go out for a minute because there was something I forgot to do. There we go. All right, so let's get started. Tonight's session is called Go to the Margins. We're going to begin by looking at traditional engagement, how it can contribute in the myth of the hard to reach. Then we're going to look at 20th century or more up-to-date engagement and some strategies that you can use. Oh, thanks, Jill. The chat is disabled. Oh, see if you can use Q&A. So the chat's disabled. Just put your questions in the Q&A. I'll find them. My name is Nancy Angevine Sands. I am a family engagement consultant, a former teacher, a parent of 3 children, and a vendor with the board. And I am working with the Parent and Community Engagement Office this year to support school councils. If you have any questions after tonight's episode that you don't think about till later, or anything else you want to know about your school councils or about bylaws, you can reach me at my email, which is withequalstep@gmail.com. And of course, there we go. We'll begin with the acknowledgement of traditional lands. We acknowledge that we are hosted on the lands of the Mississaugas of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Wendat. We also recognize the enduring presence of all First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples. So we're going to begin where I've begun each of these training sessions, and that is with the mandate for school councils as laid out in the Education Act, Regulation 612. The purpose of school councils is, through the active participation of parents, to improve pupil achievement and to enhance the accountability of the education system to parents. The council's primary means of achieving this purpose is by making recommendations in accordance with this regulation to the principal of the school and the board, and I would add the ministry that established the council. And this evening, this is really important for this evening, because this evening I want to speak to you about ways that you can, what we call, go to the margins. You can go to those parents and caregivers that you don't normally hear from. They have a voice. We just have not allowed them or given them a means to use that voice. The little guy at the bottom reminds us that we have to keep our eye on the ball, and that is the active participation of parents to improve pupil achievement. So traditional engagement, I've said this in other workshops, it bears repeating, is a shared responsibility between schools, community agencies, and organizations and families to reach out and engage families in meaningful ways to make them act, to ensure that they can be actively supporting their children's learning. It's continuous across a child's life and entails commitment, but changing parent roles as the child matures into young adulthood. And it cuts across and reinforces learning in the multiple settings where children learn: at home, pre-kindergarten programs, schools, after-school programs, faith-based institutions, and in the community with family and friends. But what is, and that is how we have always looked for years at the definition of engagement. But what is a traditional engagement practice? Well, traditionally, it's been very school-centric. So we find engagement is defined by, are the parents volunteering at school? Are they fundraising or contributing money? Are they reading any communications that come home from the school? Are they helping their child with homework? Are they going to school councils, school council meetings, and participating in those events? The problem is that these definitions, these school-centric definitions of what engagement is, have been put together by watching what white middle-class families have traditionally done over the past 4 or 5 decades. What do white middle-class parents feel comfortable doing when working with the school, the teachers, the administration? And the problem with this is that it has helped to create what I call the myth of the hard to reach. Or as Dr. Ann Ishimuro, a researcher in the States, says, that these practices contribute to an alienating environment for working class families and families of color. And it results in families who don't participate in school-based events being labeled as not valuing education. And a belief develops amongst educators and amongst the engaged parents that sit around a school council table. A belief develops that these families lack the skills or the knowledge or the capabilities or even caring about their kids' education. And sometimes we then try to fix them so that they'll do it our way, or we dismiss them as hard to reach. And what I'm going to propose to you is that when this happens, what is hard to reach is not the families, it's the school and the school council. So what is the impact of this traditional engagement practice? This practice that I've already said has been based on what usually white middle-class families have traditionally done. We know from research that parents may harbor negative feelings towards the schools because of previous direct or vicarious negative experiences. I think one of the most moving things I've read about this is a school where the parents there were multi-generations had lived in this neighborhood. And the new principal came to the school and she wanted to engage the parents, and she tried everything. She sent notices home, she invited parents in, but they weren't coming. Some would come, but not many. But she would notice that the parents would walk their kids to school and they'd stop a block or two from the school and send the kids from there. And at the end of the day, they'd be standing at the corner again, waiting for the kids to come. They wouldn't come to the school. So because she really cared about engaging her families, she went to them. And she said, look, I've done all this stuff. Why aren't you coming in? And they looked at her and they said, you know, we went to that school and it was the worst experience of our lives, but we don't have the choice. We have to send our kids there. But we vowed we would never go through those doors again. So we have to think about that as parents who are engaged at the table, who are going into school. What is stopping the parents and caregivers in our neighborhood? What is stopping some of them from coming through the doors, from engaging in what we have to offer? And I'm going to look at a few things that may be stopping them, not just previous experiences. Other observations of blatant racism or feelings of discrimination may cause racialized parents to take a defensive stance when interacting with school settings. And that defensive stance is in quotes, because that's how the school is labeling them. They're not labeling themselves that way. And even with clear invitations to school events, racialized parents may be reticent if they perceive that the school officials hold discriminatory attitudes and biases towards them. Nobody wants to go where they're not appreciated, where they're not trusted, where they're not respected. I read a very interesting paper a couple of years ago by a professor down in I believe Washington State, where she looked at African-American families and why they were hesitant to engage in their school. And what she found is that a large number of the parents, the mothers, the fathers who would engage in the school, who would come into the school, were doing it because they felt that their children were facing discriminatory practices, racism, and they wanted to be there and see for themselves and support and advocate for their child, which I don't think is the type of engagement that we want. And I don't mean that we don't want them to come in to be checking that their child is safe. I mean that we want to be making safe environments for our students, for our parents, and our caregivers. So if that's traditional engagement, what would we want 21st century engagement to look like? Well, we need to begin by acknowledging whiteness and white privilege and power, and explicitly addressing race and racism in engagement. We want to move beyond school-centric white middle-class expectations. We want to move towards family, student-centric engagement and expectations. We want to scaffold parent-caregiver efficacy, leadership, and power. I'm going to speak a little bit in a minute, a little bit more about efficacy, but I also want to say here, I said it in previous training sessions, that as school councils, we need to recognize that we have a job of leadership within the education system, and we have a level of power within the education system. And it goes back to that mandate. We have to make the system accountable to parents, and we have to work for student achievement. We can also center non-dominant parent-caregiver ways of knowing and being, to value and appreciate the family knowledge that exists in all of our parents, and find ways that we can utilize that parent knowledge for the betterment of our students. And what can school councils, what can your role be? Well, you can begin with parent, caregiver, and community priorities, interests, concerns, knowledge, and resources. And I'm going to talk about that a bit more under strategies. Finding out what's important to our whole community, what interests are out there, what are their concerns, what's their family knowledge and their resources that we could bring and utilize in the work that we're doing as school councils to support our broader community. We need to transform power, to understand that as school councils, we have a very important role in the education system, and that as school councils, the power in what we do shouldn't just sit with a few who sit around the table, that we have to go to the margins and empower all of our parents and caregivers to have a role, to have a part, to have a say in what's going on. We need to build reciprocity and agency, and undertake change as collective inquiry. And I hope that I make these points a little bit clearer as we go along. I want to speak for just a moment about efficacy, because we've seen that word twice in the last two slides. Efficacy is described as the ability to produce a desired or intended result. Right? If we want to build the efficacy of our parents and caregivers to support student achievement and to make the system accountable to them, how can we do that? What sort of things do we need to consider? Well, the parents and caregivers' belief in their efficacy, in their ability to do the things that are expected of them, it is determined by how they behave, the effort they make, and how long they persist in something. So their belief in being able to support their child's learning depends on what they do. Can they do they feel comfortable to come in and learn about how to support their child? Do they feel comfortable in making the effort? Do they believe in themselves? And will they persist in doing it when it becomes difficult or when they face some challenges in getting in? Their sense of efficacy comes from how they feel they're doing. We all know that ourselves in anything we do as parents, in our job, in our hobbies, how we feel we're doing the job that we're doing determines our ability to be able to do that job. How our parents and caregivers feel about their efficacy compared to others. Right? So we have to remember, this is really important, especially like just something as simple as a school council meeting. When a parent comes to a school council meeting for the very first time, and they sit down and there's a whole pile of people in the room who have obviously been there many times before, who understand what's happening, who understand the system, who feel comfortable in what they're doing and how they're doing. They're going to make that new person that's just come may feel that compared to the others, maybe they don't have as much to offer, and they may just sit there very quietly. So as school councils, it's up to us to make the new attendees feel comfortable at our school council meetings, to explain things, to welcome them, to ask them questions, to engage them in any conversation that goes on, not only at our school council meetings, but any activities that we hold. Their sense of efficacy also comes from the encouragement that they receive. So, the first time we do something, it's not always turns out great. But if we're encouraged to keep trying, if we're encouraged to keep making that effort, to keep persisting in what we're trying to do, then we start to feel, yeah, you know what? Maybe I have the ability to do this. Maybe I can support my child's learning. And again, their confidence, both their physical and emotional confidence in where they are, what they're doing, and how they're doing it. So I've said this before, and I'll keep saying it. Parent-caregiver engagement, to be effective, must be relational, it must be linked to learning, and it must build the capabilities of our parents and caregivers. So anything that you do, as I go through the strategies, if you want to do one or two of them or take them and tweak them a little, what you do moving forward with your parents should be about building relationships, should have something to do with learning and how they can support their child's learning and build their capabilities, their efficacy to do that. Doesn't have to do all three, can do one, can do two, but it should do these. When you're trying to decide what you should do next as an activity, this is the question you want to ask yourself. Does it hit any or all three of these things? A couple of things I want you to think about before we move on to the strategies. So parents and caregivers are often the recipients of reports telling them what their data means and how it's used, right? okay, we collected this information about you, and this is what it means, and this is how we're going to use it. This is particularly important. The next session we're going to be doing is on the school improvement process, and this comes up then. We have to, as parents and as school councils, give our parents a voice in saying what data is important, by data, I mean any form of information, what information is important, and how it should be used. Right? It's not enough for us as school councils or as in the data we collect, or as school councils in what we represent about our communities to the school. It's not enough to just let them to take that information and do with it what they will, right? This is part of the power sharing. It's up to us as school councils to help our parents and caregivers, especially those at the margins, to provide some of the knowledge, to provide some of the data, and to have a say on how it might be used. Shane Saphir, who is a teacher and educator in the States, says that what if we listened deeply to their voices and experiences? What if, as school councils, we listen deeply to the voices and experiences of our parents and caregivers, not just those who sit around the council table, but the parents at the margins of our community, the ones that we don't hear from, the ones that we have to encourage to speak. What would that mean to our work going forward? And Dr. Ursula Franklin talked about reciprocity and the need for reciprocity, which she defined as a need for listening, a need to understand and to accommodate. Right? When we go out, when we provide opportunities to hear back from our parents and caregivers, are we really listening? Are we understanding what we're saying? And then are we going to try to accommodate what we hear in the work that we do? And hopefully a little side angle of this will be that if we begin these practices of school councils, our teachers and our administrators will learn from us and will copy some of what we're doing, because they see that it's being effective, that we are starting to do some really important work with our full community. So in one of the first workshops, I said that authentic engagement begins and ends with relationships, and it does. And you will remember that relationships is one of the three things that engagement should do. If we don't have good relationships, if we don't build good relationships with our parents and caregivers, we cannot figure out how to do effective, authentic engagement in our school. And to do that, we need communication. We need to communicate with them. We need to speak to them, give them information, and also listen and get information back. So this is where you're going to need that piece of paper and pen. I'll let you get it ready now. I'm going to give you 4 things that I would like you to do. And if you just have a little place on your paper where you do those things, we'll get started. The first thing I'd like you to do is draw a circle. Now I'd like you to draw a triangle. I'd like you to put a square in the corner. And finally, I'd like you to write your name. Okay, so I asked you to draw a circle. I asked you to draw a triangle. I asked you to put a square in the corner. And I asked you to write your name. Unfortunately, I can't talk to you and hear back from you, but I wonder how many of you if you look at your paper, what you wrote looks and drew looks exactly what I have here. And I've done this in-person workshops, and I'm going to bet that it doesn't look exactly like mine. I'm going to bet that most of yours don't look anything like mine. And I'm going to ask you why not. Because I gave you what I consider to be very simple instructions, just a few words, spoke in simple language. I didn't use any complicated language, complicated words. There was only 4 things I asked you to do, and you didn't do it. You struggled with it. When I do this in person, sometimes somebody will put their hand up and say, well, what kind of triangle or what corner? And they start asking me questions. And I was really clear. I was really clear on what I wanted you to do. Why I like this exercise is because for me, it's a really good lesson in communication. When we communicate with our parent and caregivers, even sometimes when we communicate with our teachers, we think we're being clear in what we want. We think, I know what I'm saying. How come they don't know what I say? And we have to constantly be looking and checking if what we are saying is actually clear. I know myself sometimes when I'm explaining something, if I know it, I'm leaving out little bits of information because I know the whole story. I got the whole picture in my mind, but the person I'm telling, they don't have the whole picture and they're struggling to kind of put the pieces together. And we have to remember that. We also have to remember that if we don't have a way in our communication for our parents and caregivers to respond back to us, either with suggestions or with questions, then all we're doing is a monologue. It's not a dialogue. It's not effective communication. It's just us talking. It's going back to what I said in the previous slide, where we're just taking information in or sending it out and deciding what's going to happen to it with no care about anybody else. So I'll leave this with you, and I hope that you will remember it as you go through the year communicating with your parents and caregivers. So finally, we're getting to the go to the margins part of this. And what do I mean when I'm talking about go to the margins? What am I asking you to do? Well, first I'm asking, how are race, class, language, ability, nationality, and education represented in your meetings and in your decision making? This is not only what efforts do you put in to have a broad representation of your community in your elections and the choosing of your members, but because your school council meetings are open to everybody, what are you doing to ensure that you have broad representation coming to your meetings and that there are opportunities for them to speak to each issue, for them to ask questions, for them to bring up and talk about things that are important to them? And then, is what you are hearing affecting your decision making? Is it taking into account the ways of knowing and being, that the diverse ways of knowing and being in all of our communities? Who's at your meetings? Who's missing? Whose voices are heard and which are silenced? And why are they silenced? And what do you need to change so that the people who are missing at your table or your events are no longer missing, that they are encouraged to come? Those parents that stood at the curb and wouldn't come closer to the school because of their experiences in the school. What could you do to make them feel more comfortable to come to the school. And part of that, I'll give you a hint, is listening, not deciding for them what would make them comfortable, but asking them and listening to what's happening that is discouraging families from attending or coming out. Don't exclude or ostracize people for raising concerns. I've seen this myself at school council meetings where someone steps up with a concern and they're really upset about it. And it's like everybody's, oh my God. It's important to them and it's valuable to them. Now, you are not allowed at a school council meeting to talk about things that are personal. You can't personally talk about why Mrs. Jones has an issue with what's going on with her son, but you can talk about the issue broadly. And you can talk about, let's say it's a discipline issue. You can talk about the broader context of discipline and what the theories or the practices are at the school. Take time to listen and reflect on the concerns that you're hearing before responding, so that your parents and caregivers, they feel heard. I should have written it down. I was reading something a few months ago, and it said that when someone speaks, something like 53% of what they mean is in their body language, 7% is in their words, and 40% is in their tone of voice. So I think that's kind of important to remember. What we're saying isn't always what we're feeling. Choose events that come from and reflect the ideas, the traditions, the cultures, and the strengths of the families that are represented at your school. To be realistic, every single event that you do is not going to be able to reflect every single tradition and culture and strength of all of your families. But over the context of the year, are you doing various things that address those issues, that address the traditions or the ideas or the strengths of your families? Or are you keeping a very narrow focus, doing what the people around the table think is important in the way the people around the table think it is important, and at a time and place that the people around the table think is important? I've said this before, and it bears repeating now. The people who are sitting around the table, the school council table, who have put their name forward to be school council members, and bless them, but they are already engaged to some extent. They are engaged enough that they have taken the step to allow their name to go forward and to sit in council and to do that work. They don't need to be convinced as hard that engagement is important as those parents and caregivers who didn't put their names in, who don't come to meetings, who don't participate in the discussions. It doesn't mean that those people that didn't do those things don't have ideas, don't have knowledge, don't have something important to offer, but something is challenging them and is a barrier to them doing that. So we as a council, we as the engaged, have to figure out how to spread that engagement out, how to go to the margins. A couple of questions that I think are important when you think about outreach. Who belongs in your community? And who are the community leaders? I often say this, especially around election time, when you're trying to find people to stand for office, to stand to be a member of council. Every community has, and I mean, even the micro communities within your community have leaders. All the group of parents who know each other because their kids play soccer together, right? There's one or two parents in there who are the leaders, who are the go-to people. The group of parents that worship at a certain house of worship. They're together. There's one or two parents within them that are within that group that are the leaders. And when you need to find some parent volunteers, when you need to find some people to put their name for school council, when you need to get some parents together to talk, to hear from them, going to those leaders is a really good place to start, getting them on side, and then let them do the work of finding and spreading the word. To whom does a school and the school council send information? And what information does the school communicate to the community? And is it always what the community wants or needs to hear? Does it satisfy the needs, the diverse needs of your community? And do you know what the members of your community need or want to know? Shane Saphir, who I've mentioned already, says that we listen to ensure that the solutions we devise are shaped by the voices at the margins, rather than our projection of what people need. Right? When you are planning what you are going to do this year to support student achievement and to make the system accountable, listening is the best way to help you figure that out. And listening to the voices at the margins will help you learn and understand what they need, not what you project that they need from standing in the center, right? And I like listening circles. I think they're a great way to do that. Some people call them chai and chat. Some I've heard them called come chat with the principal. Call them whatever you want, but they are organized, ongoing, maybe monthly, bi-monthly. They can even take place at school council meetings, opportunities to listen and to find solutions through listening. So what do they look like? Well, each session would have a theme. So you might have discipline. You might have a session on some aspect of literacy or numeracy. You might have a session, if you're in high school, you might have a session on assessment. You might have a session on safety, or even the internet. And I do this because I see that all the time. Narrowing the theme down to something. It can be just how's things going with your kids. It could be about how are you coming out of COVID? What's going on? You have to have clear guidelines for how the meeting is going to work, so that everybody understands what's going to happen. You'll want to have a moderator who will guide the session. But when do we speak? How do we speak? How long do we get to speak? It's even talking about being respectful of what you hear, that everyone has an opinion and it's worthy of listening to. And make sure that however you're doing your circles, that they are culturally appropriate, so that whatever the practice is, it doesn't leave out some parents who would not feel comfortable there. That is particularly important if you were to have a listening circle outside of this. You're going to have an in-person listening circle, and outside of the school, you were going to meet at a coffee shop or something. Is this a place where everyone would feel comfortable? Be aware of your biases. And be open to new opinions and insights. Don't get defensive. Don't feel that if somebody brings something up, you have to defend that. Listen to them, listen to what they're saying, and look for an avenue where you can come closer to what they're trying to express. And again, watch for nonverbal cues. What I was saying, their tone of voice, their body language. So what are some sample questions or topics? You could just have a listening circle. It'd be a good one to start them off with. What's going well for your child right now? And what's something you feel proud of? Why not start listening circle practice with something positive, where parents just come in and sit down, and this listening circle, we're going to talk about our kids. And we want you to come with one thing you're really proud of your child. Then the next session, you could talk about what's your biggest challenge or frustration about their school experience. And you'll notice a different topic. Sometimes, what are you proud about your child? Parents are going to talk about that. They're going to be more open with that. They're going to be a little hesitant, a little reticent about talking about their biggest challenge or frustrations because they don't want to be labeled perhaps as a complainer, or they feel that their frustration, maybe it's their fault, or maybe they're wrong, or maybe they misunderstood something. So as the moderator, and as part of the rules and the guidelines for the listening circle is to make your parents and caregivers feel comfortable speaking honestly. Another question you could ask, what should we know about your beliefs or your values or your culture to best support you, to best make the system accountable to you, to best support you, to support your child's learning? Is there anything that we need to know? And this is a great way to learn about the beliefs and values and the cultures of all of our parents at the school. And then finally, how could council most effectively support our families? Parents have, this will not be the first question you ask, but parents have a lot of great ideas. When they start to understand that, yeah, this is what I'm proud that my child does, but this is what frustrates me with the system. This is where my child is struggling, and I'm not sure if it's the system or my child, but our culture, we do this. This is how the sort of things that our family does to support our child. Slowly building these things and then getting to how could the council, knowing all these, how could we effectively support you? So I hope you see through these suggestions that your listening circles are building one on the other to make your families or your participants feel comfortable in sharing their information, in giving their voice to the circle, and that also that what they're sharing with you isn't just going to disappear into some void and never be heard from again, but it's actually going to inform the work that the council does. And it's important. It's going to help the council. It's going to help other parents and caregivers. It's going to help their children succeed. Another way for you to, or another reason for you to get together with your families is through consultation. You can also do this through listening circles, but you can do it in any number of other ways. The Regulation 612 tells us that school councils must consult with parents, caregivers on the code of conduct of the school, the dress code of the school. This comes up mainly if a school is looking at moving to uniforms. The school improvement plan, a very, very important level of consultation. Safe school plans, the budget, and issues that have a school-wide impact. The school must seek your information, your expertise, your opinions on these things. You can also have informal consultations on things like how are we going to spend our school funds, either those that have been given to us from the board or ministry or funds that we have raised. Is there anything you'd like to do, or do you have any ideas about field trips? Are there any lunchroom issues that have come up that the school should know about? Is there anything about entry and dismissal times? These are just some informal consultation items that you should be going out farther and farther through your school community to the margins to consult with everybody on how they feel about that. At the last session that we did, I talked about various ways to communicate and to get information back. So if you go on the YouTube channel in the next couple of weeks when it's up, you'll be able to get some ideas. How can you consult with your communities? Well, if your school has an affinity group, affinity groups are groups that have been put together. For example, it could be Black parents, it could be Asian parents, it could be parents of special education students, parents that have a commonality and work and listen together. If you have affinity groups in your school, you could go to them. You could use your listening circles to consult on these things. You can have focus groups where you invite parents in to talk about this specific thing that we need to know. Or in your school council meetings, make sure that you have time to talk about a particular issue, to discuss, to lay out the options, the possibilities, and then to ask for information and ask for opinions and ideas on whatever the question happens to be that you're consulting on. And remember to always go to the margins, not just the people that show up at your meetings, but to have different ways of connecting with the different communities within your school. Just the last two things I want you to remember, and that is that when you go to the margins, when you speak to the people around the school council table, when you speak to the people that sometimes come to the school council table, when you speak to the people that you never see, what you learn needs to inform what you do. Because if it doesn't, they will not feel heard, and they will not participate again. And we need to hear them so that we know what are the needs of our families, what are the needs of our parents and caregivers, so that we can help them to build their efficacy to support the learning of their children. When parents will engage, remember I talked about the hard to reach and how they don't really exist. Parents will engage when the information, the organization, or the situation is meaningful and relevant to them. Plus, nobody came out to that. Well, whose idea was it that it would meet the need? So when that happens, one of two things could be taking place. One, you had an event that appealed to just a narrow circle of people, probably who's sitting around your table, and not to your broader community. Or two, it was a good idea. It would appeal to the broader community, but there was something in the way you organized it that didn't work. So you don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. You sit down and which you should do anyway, successful or not, you sit down and assess what you did, look at it carefully. What was our objective? Who were we aiming it at? How did we set it up? How did we advertise? Is there anything in there that we could have done to reach more people and make it more appealing for a broader participation? I know of a school that did an event one year for parents. They called it was a high school. They called it Parent University. And it was a day of learning. They would come in, they would go to different workshops, and it's sort of like a mini a PIAC conference. And excuse me, the first year, I think they got 20 parents. They knew it was a good idea. So they did it again the next year, and they just tweaked some of the ways they did it. I think the fourth year they did it, they had something like 150, 200 parents out, right? Because they got better at answering the needs of their parents. And also the parents who came to the first and the second and the third one said that was really good. And they told their friends, and they had their friends come out, right? So when we do things that's meaningful and relevant to our parents and caregivers, they will engage. And the final thing I want to leave you with is that change moves at the speed of trust. What I am asking of you tonight is to change, probably to change a lot of the ways that your school council has worked in the past. And to do that, you are going to have to gain the trust of the rest of the council members sitting around the table. You're going to have to gain the trust of the parents that come out and sit at your school council meetings. You're going to have to gain the trust of the parents that sometimes come out and sit at the meetings. You're going to have to gain the trust of the parents at the margins. And that takes a while. That goes through building relationships and communicating. But change can happen. Just understand that sometimes it has to be slow, and you set yourselves up with certain goals. We want to be here by January. We want to be here by June. We want to be here by next December, and figure out how you can do that. So I'm going, and just before I stop, there are 2 more workshops. On November the 9th, I'm doing a workshop on the school improvement plan. This is very important. This is about parent voice. This is about going to the margins. This is about the information and data that the schools use to figure out how to improve various aspects of what happens in the school life. This is about sharing power. All of the things I talked about this evening. So that's November 9th, which I think is next Wednesday or Thursday. And then on the 17th is one final workshop on the bylaws and the bylaw template. So I will just stop sharing. And if you have any questions, put them in the Q&A. So the first question, I think this needs to include all the white Eastern European immigrants. Many are middle class, but they do not understand our school system or ways. And it's been a struggle to engage them and start dialogue. They feel excluded. Yes. It includes any parent for whatever reason. In the example I use, it can include parents who were part of the system, grew up in the system and did not like it. It can include parents who are new to the system in Ontario. It can include parents who are new to the system in Canada, who grew up under a completely different system. It's interesting that that question should mention Eastern European parents. A friend of mine, he did his PhD looking at Eastern European parents, and what he discovered, and I've used his work many times, is, and something that we have to remember, even as I talk about it when I work with teachers, but it's important for school councils too. It's called curriculum orientation, how we think of how curriculum should be taught. And he interviewed a mom who said, why should I bake cupcakes for a bake sale? And why should I buy a cupcake? Because I don't get how that's going to help my daughter achieve and do better academically. I just don't get it. Because it wasn't part of her orientation in how she grew up. And you know what? It's a fair question. And those of you who attended my session on fundraising will understand what I think about raising money and how it links to student achievement. Not very much for those of you who didn't attend. So we have to be aware of these things when we're asking our parents to participate in an event or an activity that we as a council are doing. Do they understand why we're doing it? Do they understand the benefits of it, either the indirect benefits or the direct benefits? The other part of that question is also in going to the margins, and especially many of our communities now with the influx of Ukrainian parents and caregivers that have come over just this year, is working really hard to make them feel welcome, to make them feel that they have a place here, to help them to understand the system and to help them to understand their role in it. And I have specifically talked about Ukrainian parents, but the same is for any new parents from from Asia, from South Asia, from Africa, from South America, from Central America, getting them to bringing them in and letting them understand how the system works and what their place is in it, but also to understand what they bring, what knowledge do they bring, what skills do they bring that would be really valuable for the school council to use. I talked a little bit about it in the last workshop that I did. I've also mentioned this before about a parent at a workshop I did who was from Afghanistan, and he was a reporter in Afghanistan. The knowledge and the skill sets that he could bring, particularly to a high school or middle school, but even to an elementary school, is blow your mind. So you're sitting on a wealth of family knowledge out there. You're sitting on a worldwide universal wealth of family knowledge, and to not take advantage of that would be a shame. I belong to an obedient immigrant community who respect the system and therefore do not feel the need to participate. What can I do to involve them? It's my first year in the public school system as a parent. Yes. You know what? We all have our inherent biases. And I think how can you involve parents who did not grow up in a system where engagement was a possibility, let alone an expectation? I think the first thing is to find a way. Everybody wants to know how the system works. They want to sort of understand it, even if they don't think they have a role in it. So the first thing to do would be to hold a listening circle or to hold an information night on the system. This is how the system works. This is the tiers. This is what the ministry does. This is what the board does. This is what the principal and the teacher do, to get them to understand that, and to get them to understand what, as a parent, your role and responsibilities are, what we are able to do, and then slowly work them towards what they can do, how the school council is here to help them and support them. I think that part of it is, remember I talked about going to the community leaders, and I think it's about going to who are the parents that those parents listen to? Who are the parents that those parents go to ask questions? And going to them and getting them on side. I had a friend who was in a school council that was in a very, very diverse neighborhood. The school council was not diverse at all. And she was lucky. It was a model school. So she could go to the settlement worker, she could go to the CSW and ask them to help. And she said what she needed, and she said what she wanted, what her wish was, the wish that they would be more, the council would be more diverse, that they would hear more diverse voices, and sent them out to find those community leaders and to get them to do some of the PR work for them. We don't have to do it all ourselves. What is a model school? Margaret, are you on? Sorry, Margaret Horvath.
I am here. I was just about to write the answer in, and I heard the words coming out of your mouth, so you go for it.
For those of you who don't know Margaret is the office manager of the Parent and Community Engagement Office, the source of all knowledge and wisdom. Margaret, explain what a model school is.
Oh, I'm dark on this side. A model school is a group of 150 schools that's been identified by TDSB according to their LOI, which is the Learning Opportunity Index. So it's schools that are lower on the lower opportunity index. So it's 150 schools that have the added, they have a community support worker that assists them.
Can you explain what the Learning Opportunities Index is?
No. Just sounds good coming out of my mouth. Learning, no, honestly, I can't. I don't know what it is. Do you know what it is?
Well, to some extent, it looks at how many single-family dwellings as opposed to apartment buildings or townhouses are in the neighborhood, what the income level is of the majority of families. I think it looks a little bit at languages, and I'm not sure if it looks at, does it look at the if they're newcomers? I'm not sure if it looks mainly at housing and income levels.
Yes, that sounds wonderful.
Are there any other questions? I'm going to put my email in the chat in case some questions come up afterwards. No more. Okay, so I just want to emphasize and encourage you to understand that the parents that and caregivers who you don't see, who you don't hear from, are interested in their child's education. They are more than likely engaging in their child's education at home in their own way, and hoping they all have the same hopes and dreams for their children, and want their children to succeed. So it's a matter of us finding a way to make them feel comfortable so that they can be heard, so that they can bring their family, their parent knowledge to the table, that the school council can use it to do some really good work. All these ideas about going to the margin are great. So do we have autonomy in writing the agenda? What if the principal is not aligned with you? Ooh, that's a good question. So let's get to the basics first. The agenda is put together by the chair of the council, the chair or co-chair of the council. The chair or co-chair of the council would create the agenda in consultation with their executive and their committees. Do the committees have any reports to make? Does any of the executive have reports to make? And then in consultation with the principal. So for example, years ago when I was school council chair, I would write up the agenda as I, from what I had heard, and I would go and I would meet with my principal a week or two before the meeting, and I would say, so this is what I think needs to go on the agenda. This is what I've been hearing at the curb and the playground, in the hallways with parents, is issues that have to be addressed. Have you heard anything? Is there anything that's come up at the school or that you've been hearing from the board or the ministry that has to be addressed? And then if there was, we would talk about it and decide if it needed to be on. And then I'd put it on the agenda and send the agenda out. If you are not getting cooperation from the principal in doing this, I'm not sure, are you not, I guess the question is, are you not getting cooperation in allowing you to write the agenda? In which case, you would say, well, I've been going to some training sessions for school council, and I've learned that the law says it's my job as the council chair to do the agenda. But of course, I will be collaborating with you in how we would get that done. If the problem is, or the issue is, having the principal buy into going to the margins, I'm uncertain as to why they would not want to hear from all of their parents. And This is partly goes back to the screen. You remember where I talked about transforming power? This is part of that. Sometimes as parents and caregivers, sometimes as school council leaders, and I use that term deliberately, it's up to us to teach our educators what effective and meaningful engagement looks like. And we teach them that through our example. So it's about, well, I just really believe that there's parents that we aren't hearing from that have a lot to offer. And I think that we need to get out there and offer it to them. And let me say at this point too, especially for those of you with large immigrant populations at your school, there are translation services that you can get through the PCEO. You have to pay for those. Interpretation you can get for your school council meetings, and you don't have to pay for those. And so make use of both of those things, and also make sure that you have a school council board, the school council email, the board operated email, because then you can use school messenger and you can send information out to everybody, all of the parents and caregivers, all of the families that the school has their email for. Oh, and now in come the questions. When I asked the principal how to get school community needs known to us, she responded that that's not our role, that's the trustee's role. The response to that is that Regulation 612, which you can say if it will help you, and that's the law, says that we have to make the system accountable to the parents, and we can't make the system accountable to the parents if we don't know what their needs are. As well, 613, which governs principals, says that it's their role to make sure that the council is made aware of any new policies or procedures sent out by either the board or the ministry. I would download the school council handbook. If you just go into Google and Google Ontario School Council Handbook, and at the back of the handbook, you will find 612 and 613, and that'll give you all the information that you may need. Or write me and I will help you with that. Some of the topics can open up a can of worms. Thus, the principal's a little hesitant. Yes, that's absolutely true. And the way around that, or to make them feel easier, is one, we have rules for participation in a learning circle, or in a listening circle, or in a learning issue. That is that we have to be respectful of each person that's speaking, that we must give each person time to speak. We must understand we will not always agree with what the other person says, but we have to respect their right to say it, unless of course it's racist or insulting. That's part of being respectful in how you speak. The other part is you can find on the TDSB website the code of conduct, and that can be made available to everybody. This is how we run our meetings. And the final thing is that sorry, I'm just trying to keep track. I should be making notes for myself. The final thing is what I said before, that you cannot bring up personal issues. So I've used this example before. My apologies to anyone who's heard it. Way back when my kids were in elementary school, food allergies were not as big a thing. We didn't know that much about anaphylactic shock and EpiPens. And there was a mom who came to the council because her son had a severe peanut allergy, and he had to eat at school some days, and she was really worried about that. We could not discuss her son's peanut allergy. We could not discuss the instances that had happened in the lunchroom and how it made him feel and things like we weren't allowed to do that on the floor of the council meeting. However, we could discuss food allergies broadly. We could discuss what anaphylactic shock was and what it looked like, and EpiPens and how they could be used for safety. We could discuss what we could put in our lunches, in our children's lunches, that would make them safe for the kids that were sitting around them. Okay, we could talk about the broader issue. The mom went away feeling heard. She went away feeling safer than she had felt before. There was another mom who told me later that like her son had peanut allergies, and she really felt for the first time, she felt supported, because there were a few parents who were going, oh, well, come on, well, my kid will only eat peanut butter. And other parents would say, well, no, if there's an issue, a safety issue where a kid could end up in the hospital because of it, then this is what we have to do, right? And so that's I think that's one reason why you want to bring up these issues, but also in letting the principal know that there will be rules for discussion, there will be a code of conduct, and personal issues cannot come to the floor. We can only talk about them generally. Then maybe that would make them feel better. As well, it's also say, well, what would make you feel better, principal, in doing this? What could we put together that would make you feel more confident that we weren't going to open up a can of worms and have a big problem? Yes, interpretation. Well, okay, translation and interpretation. So translation services, it's just that in the board means if you write up a newsletter and you want part of it translated into Mandarin and another translated into Urdu, you can go to the board and you can get they'll give you a translator and they will translate that part of it. You have to pay for that. Interpretation services is if you have a meeting and you want an interpreter there to speak to some parents that speak Mandarin or speak Urdu or speak Tagalog or Ukrainian, and you want the interpreter there, you can get that in and you don't have to pay for that. Margaret, did you want to add anything? You're not on.
Sounds like I was there for support for you. You were good.
Oh, all right, good.
One of the things that was brought up a while ago is that some school councils need to consider that perhaps their school council meeting is not conducted in English, because they might have a very large population of non-English speaking parents and caregivers, and perhaps it's English that's actually interpreted. So that's something to consider.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Margaret, I should ask, I know that one of our school councils put together a list of a whole pile of common phrases in a wide
and that's already been posted on the external TDSB website under school council. So there's the tdsb.on.ca community, how to get involved, school councils. We've already posted that.
Okay, great. So if you go on school councils, you will see. Thank you to the school that did that. They put together a whole list of common phrases in a variety of languages, and they sent it to us, and it's yours to use for free. Really, really handy, really handy form to have. I'm just checking if I've answered all of the questions. I hope so. Are there any other questions? Okay, so I'm going to let you go 10 minutes early. If you have any questions, if anything comes up to you or you can't find anything or you want clarification on something I said, then please don't hesitate to write to me. And I saw you come on, Margaret. Did you have something to add?
Nope, just
No,
in
okay.
case somebody wanted to ask me a question.
Okay, just her smiling face. Oh, there's a question. Oh, just a comment. Thank you. Thank you. And again, as I do every evening, I will end by thanking you for all of the hard work that you do. I know from experience that it is hard work. It's underappreciated, underpaid, because you don't get any pay, but it's exceedingly important work, making the system accountable to parents and pupil achievement, helping our kids do to the best of their ability. What else could you do that would be more important than that? So thank you for joining me this evening, and I hope to see you back next week. And have a great rest of the week and a wonderful weekend.